The summer of 1974 marked the final season of the Starlight Family Circus, though no one knew it at the time. For 3 generations, the traveling show had meandered through the American Midwest, bringing wonder and spectacle to small farming towns, where entertainment was scarce and dreams came at the price of a 50-cent admission ticket. From Minnesota to Missouri, the red and yellow striped big top had been a familiar sight, appearing like a mirage on the outskirts of communities that counted the circus's annual visit among their most cherished traditions. The Starlight Family Circus was owned and operated by the Romano family, Italian immigrants whose great-grandfather Giuseppe had brought the secrets of European circus artistry to America in the 1890s. By 1974, the show was under the management of Vincent Romano, a 4th-generation circus owner whose deep-set eyes and permanent 5 o'clock shadow gave him the appearance of a man carrying secrets too heavy for casual conversation. Vincent was 43 years old that fateful summer, a compact man with powerful hands who could still perform on the flying trapeze when circumstances required it. He had inherited not just the circus but also the burden of keeping alive a dying American institution. Television had changed everything, and small traveling circuses were becoming extinct as audiences preferred the comfort of their living rooms to the dust and sweat of canvas tents. The Starlight Family Circus employed 37 people that summer, a number that included performers, roustabouts, ticket sellers, and the various specialists who kept the complex operation running smoothly. Among them was Jasper McKinnon, the circus's primary clown, whose painted smile and oversized red shoes had delighted children throughout the Midwest for over 15 years. Jasper was an enigmatic figure even among the colorful cast of circus performers. At 51, he was older than most clowns still actively performing, and his act had evolved over the years from simple slapstick to something more sophisticated and, some whispered, occasionally unsettling. Children laughed at his antics, but parents sometimes noticed a darkness in his painted eyes that seemed inconsistent with the joy he was supposed to represent. The circus traveled with a menagerie that included aging elephants, temperamental horses, and a collection of big cats whose glory days were behind them. The animals were cared for by Dmitry Volkov, a Russian immigrant who had joined the circus in 1969 after fleeing circumstances in his homeland that he never fully explained. Dmitry was a bear of a man with hands scarred from decades of working with dangerous animals, and he possessed an almost supernatural ability to calm even the most aggressive beasts. The 1974 season had been particularly challenging for the Starlight Family Circus. Attendance was down. Several longtime performers had left for more stable employment, and Vincent was struggling to meet payroll. The show was scheduled to conclude its season in early September, with a final week of performances in Millbrook, Iowa, a farming community of 3,200 residents who had welcomed the circus annually for over 2 decades. Millbrook was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's business, where the most exciting event of the year was typically the Harvest Festival, and where the arrival of the circus transformed the mundane rhythm of agricultural life into something magical, if only temporarily. The circus traditionally set up in Hartwell Field, a large pasture on the outskirts of town owned by retired farmer Edgar Hartwell, who donated the use of his land in exchange for free tickets for his grandchildren. The setup began on Monday, September 2, 1974, with the familiar ritual of raising the big top and arranging the smaller tents that housed the sideshow attractions, the ticket booth, and the performers' temporary living quarters. The process took 2 days of backbreaking labor, with every able-bodied person associated with the circus contributing to the effort. By Wednesday evening, September 4th, everything was ready for the opening performance. The big top stood proudly against the Iowa sky, its red and yellow stripes faded but still capable of evoking wonder in those who saw it. Inside, the ring was perfectly groomed. The seats were arranged in ascending rows, and the smell of sawdust, popcorn, and anticipation filled the air. The first performance on Wednesday night drew a capacity crowd of nearly 800 people, filling every seat under the big top and creating the kind of electric atmosphere that had kept the Romano family in the circus business for over 80 years. Vincent stood at the edge of the ring, watching as his performers delivered their acts with the polished precision that came from years of practice, and the desperation of knowing that this might be among their final opportunities to perform. Maria Santos, the circus's lead aerialist, flew through the air with the grace of a bird, her sequined costume catching the spotlights as she performed death-defying maneuvers 30 feet above the crowd. The Petrov brothers, a family of acrobats from Czechoslovakia, built human pyramids that seemed to defy the laws of physics, and throughout it all, Jasper McKinnon worked the crowd with his unique blend of comedy and unease, drawing laughter from children while leaving some adults with a vague sense of discomfort they couldn't quite articulate. The Thursday and Friday performances proceeded normally, with enthusiastic crowds and the kind of small-town excitement that reminded everyone why they had fallen in love with circus life in the first place. Saturday's matinee performance was scheduled for 2 p.m., with an evening show planned for 7:30 p.m. that would conclude the circus's run in Millbrook. It was during the Saturday matinee that witnesses first noticed something unusual about Jasper McKinnon's behavior. Several audience members later reported that the clown seemed agitated during his performance, missing cues and appearing to argue with invisible antagonists. His usual routine was disrupted by moments of apparent confusion, and more than one child was frightened by the intensity of his painted stare. After the matinee, Vincent Romano was seen having an animated conversation with Jasper near the performers' quarters. The exchange was conducted in hushed tones, but nearby circus workers reported hearing raised voices and what sounded like accusations. The content of their discussion remained unknown, but its aftermath would haunt Millbrook for decades to come. The evening performance on Saturday, September 7, 1974, began normally with the traditional circus fanfare and parade of performers. The crowd of nearly 700 people included families from throughout the region who had driven considerable distances to catch the final show of the season. Among them were Margaret and Robert Anderson, who had brought their 3 young children to see their first circus, and elderly Emma Kowalski, who had attended the circus annually since 1952 and considered it a sacred tradition. The performance proceeded through its first hour without incident, with the usual succession of animal acts, acrobatic displays, and comedic interludes. The audience was captivated by Maria Santos's aerial ballet and applauded enthusiastically for the Petrov brothers' daring feats of strength and balance. It was during Jasper McKinnon's final comedy segment, scheduled to appear just before the grand finale, that everything went wrong. According to witness accounts, Jasper entered the ring for his solo act, but seemed disoriented and unsteady on his feet. His usual costume appeared disheveled, and his makeup was smeared in a way that transformed his painted smile into something grotesque and disturbing. Instead of beginning his comedy routine, he stood in the center of the ring and began speaking in a voice loud enough to be heard throughout the tent. What he said that night would be debated and analyzed for decades to come. Some witnesses claimed he was confessing to crimes. Others insisted he was accusing Vincent Romano of terrible acts, and still others believed he was suffering from some kind of mental breakdown that rendered his words incoherent. Emma Kowalski, who was sitting in the front row, later testified that Jasper had pointed directly at Vincent Romano and shouted, "Tell them about the children. Tell them what you did to the children." She claimed that Vincent had immediately moved toward the ring, his face dark with anger, while other circus workers seemed to converge on Jasper from multiple directions. Margaret Anderson, who was watching with her young family, remembered hearing Jasper say something about buried secrets and the ones who never made it home. Her husband Robert recalled the clown mentioning specific names, though the acoustics of the tent and the growing commotion made it impossible to understand exactly what he was saying. What happened next was a matter of dispute among the witnesses. Some claimed that Vincent Romano entered the ring and physically confronted Jasper, while others insisted that the lights went out suddenly, plunging the entire tent into darkness. In the confusion that followed, people began leaving their seats, and by the time emergency lighting was restored, both Jasper McKinnon and Vincent Romano had disappeared from the ring. The circus workers attempted to continue the show, with the ringmaster announcing that there had been a technical difficulty and that the performance would conclude with the grand finale. But the atmosphere had been irreparably damaged, and the audience filed out of the big top with a sense of unease that many would remember for the rest of their lives. What transpired in the hours immediately following the Saturday night performance became the subject of intense speculation and investigation. According to the official account provided by circus management, Jasper McKinnon had suffered an emotional breakdown and had been taken to a local hospital for evaluation. Vincent Romano, they claimed, had accompanied him to ensure that he received proper care. But by Sunday morning, September 8th, it became clear that something far more serious had occurred. The entire Starlight family circus had vanished overnight, leaving behind only the empty big top and scattered debris that suggested a hasty departure. The animals, the equipment, the performers, and all 37 employees had disappeared without a trace. along with the circus's collection of trucks, trailers, and other vehicles. Edgar Hartwell, who owned the field where the circus had been set up, discovered the abandonment when he arrived Sunday morning to help with the traditional breakdown process. He found the big top still standing but completely empty, with personal belongings scattered around the performers' quarters and signs that the departure had been both sudden and chaotic. The Millbrook Police Department, led by Chief Harold Morrison, immediately launched an investigation into the circus's disappearance. Morrison was a methodical lawman who had served the community for 22 years, but he had never encountered anything approaching the complexity and strangeness of this case. The initial investigation revealed several disturbing facts. First, no one in Millbrook had seen or heard the circus convoy leaving town, despite the fact that moving 37 people and dozens of animals would have required multiple vehicles and considerable noise. Second, the circus had left behind thousands of dollars worth of equipment and personal belongings, suggesting that their departure had been precipitated by something more urgent than financial considerations. Most troubling was the discovery that several audience members from Saturday night's performance reported seeing what appeared to be bloodstains on the sawdust in the ring after the lights came back on. Chief Morrison ordered the sawdust to be collected and analyzed, but the technology of 1974 was insufficient to provide conclusive results about the nature of the stains. The investigation expanded beyond Millbrook, as authorities attempted to track the circus's movements. The Iowa State Police were notified, and bulletins were issued to law enforcement agencies throughout the Midwest requesting information about any sightings of the Starlight Family Circus convoy. Despite extensive efforts, no trace of the circus or its personnel was ever found. The vehicles, the animals, and all 37 people associated with the show had vanished completely, as if they had never existed. The investigation continued for months, but eventually was scaled back, due to lack of leads and the absence of any concrete evidence of criminal activity. The disappearance of the Starlight Family Circus became one of Iowa's most enduring unsolved mysteries, generating numerous theories and inspiring amateur investigators for decades to come. Some believed the circus had been involved in criminal activities and had fled to avoid prosecution. Others theorized that the entire organization had been murdered by unknown assailants, and their bodies disposed of in remote locations. A more exotic theory suggested that the circus had somehow been transported to another dimension or time period, though this speculation was generally dismissed by serious investigators. What remained undisputed was that 37 people and dozens of animals had simply vanished without leaving any trace of their fate. In the years following the disappearance, Hartwell Field was returned to agricultural use, and life in Millbrook gradually returned to normal. But the memory of that strange September night in 1974 lingered in the community's collective consciousness, passed down through generations like a local legend that no one could quite explain or forget. Edgar Hartwell continued to farm his land until his death in 1998, though he never again allowed any entertainment events to be held in the field where the circus had made its final stand. His daughter inherited the property and eventually sold it to a development company that had plans to build a shopping center on the site. In 2014, exactly 40 years after the circus's disappearance, construction began on the Millbrook Commons, a modest retail complex designed to serve the growing suburban community that had evolved around the original farming town. The development required extensive excavation of Hartwell Field, including the removal of several feet of topsoil and the installation of new foundation systems. It was during this excavation process that construction worker Danny Martinez made a discovery that would reopen one of Iowa's coldest cold cases. Martinez was operating a backhoe in what had once been the center of the field when his equipment struck something unusual, buried approximately 4 feet below the surface. Investigation revealed that the object was a large wooden crate, weathered by decades underground but still intact enough to preserve its contents. When the crate was carefully excavated and opened, it contained a collection of items that were immediately recognizable as circus memorabilia: sequined costumes, juggling equipment, old photographs, and most significantly, a complete clown costume that appeared to match descriptions of the outfit worn by Jasper McKinnon. The discovery was reported to the Millbrook Police Department, which had been incorporated into the county sheriff's office in the years since Chief Morrison's retirement. Detective Sarah Chen, a recent transfer from Des Moines who specialized in cold cases, was assigned to investigate the find and its potential connection to the 1974 disappearance. Chen was a methodical investigator who approached cold cases with a combination of modern forensic techniques and old-fashioned police work. She began by reviewing the original case files from 1974, interviewing surviving witnesses, and subjecting the newly discovered items to scientific analysis that had not been available to the original investigators. The clown costume found in the buried crate was remarkably well preserved, protected by the wooden container and the stable soil conditions of the former farm field. Forensic analysis revealed traces of human blood on the fabric, though DNA testing was complicated by the age of the samples and the degradation that had occurred over 4 decades. More significantly, the costume showed evidence of violent damage that had not been apparent to casual observation. Tears in the fabric were consistent with knife wounds, and burn marks on the material suggested that the outfit had been exposed to fire before being buried. Detective Chen's investigation also uncovered items in the crate that had not been mentioned in the original case files. Among them were several photographs showing circus performers in candid, offstage situations, and a leather-bound journal that appeared to have belonged to someone involved with the Starlight Family Circus. The journal, written in a mixture of English and what appeared to be Italian, contained entries spanning several months in 1974. The handwriting was difficult to decipher, and many pages had been damaged by moisture, but forensic document analysis suggested that it had been written by Vincent Romano himself. The legible portions of the journal painted a disturbing picture of life within the Starlight Family Circus during its final season. Romano wrote about financial pressures, conflicts among the performers, and what he described as discipline problems that required traditional solutions. More troubling were references to special arrangements with certain towns and private shows that were not part of the circus's regular performances. One entry, dated August 15, 1974, included the ominous phrase, "Jasper is becoming a problem. He asks too many questions about the special guests and refuses to participate in the private arrangements. Something will need to be done before he ruins everything we've built." Another entry from early September mentioned preparations for what Romano called the final performance, and included a list of names that appeared to match several of the circus performers who had disappeared along with the show. Detective Chen's investigation took on new urgency as she began to understand that the Starlight Family Circus's disappearance might have been connected to criminal activities that had been hidden from the original investigators. She reached out to the FBI's cold case unit and requested assistance in analyzing the evidence and expanding the investigation beyond Iowa's borders. The federal investigation revealed disturbing information about the Romano family's circus operations that had not been uncovered in 1974. FBI records showed that Vincent Romano had been suspected of involvement in illegal activities dating back to the 1960s, including possible connections to organized crime and allegations of exploitation involving underage performers. More shocking was the discovery that the Starlight Family Circus had been the subject of complaints from parents in several states who claimed that their children had gone missing after attending circus performances. These complaints had been filed with local law enforcement agencies but had never been connected or investigated as part of a larger pattern. The FBI's investigation revealed that at least 12 children had disappeared from towns where the Starlight Family Circus had performed between 1970 and 1974. The disappearances had been spread across multiple states and jurisdictions, preventing any single agency from recognizing the pattern or connecting the cases. FBI agent Michael Roberts, who led the federal investigation, believed that the Romano family had been operating what amounted to a human trafficking ring, using the circus as a cover for criminal activities that included the abduction and exploitation of children. The final performance in Millbrook, he theorized, had ended in violence when Jasper McKinnon attempted to expose the operation. According to this theory, Vincent Romano and his associates had murdered McKinnon to prevent him from revealing their crimes, then fled with the entire circus organization to avoid capture and prosecution. The buried crate had been left behind either accidentally or as a deliberate attempt to conceal evidence of what had occurred. The FBI's investigation expanded to include a search for any surviving members of the Starlight Family Circus, who might be able to provide information about the organization's criminal activities. This effort was complicated by the fact that many of the performers had used stage names and that records from the traveling circus were incomplete. However, investigators were able to locate Maria Santos, the former aerialist, who was living under an assumed name in California. Santos, now 73 years old, had spent 40 years hiding from her past association with the circus, and she initially refused to cooperate with investigators. It was only after being granted immunity from prosecution that Santos agreed to share what she knew about the Starlight Family Circus's final days. Her testimony provided the most complete account of what had happened during that last week in Millbrook and confirmed the investigators' worst suspicions about the circus's criminal activities. According to Santos, the Romano family had indeed been involved in activities far beyond legitimate entertainment. The circus served as a front for a criminal organization that specialized in the abduction and trafficking of children, who were sold to buyers throughout the United States and internationally. The operation worked by identifying vulnerable children in the small towns where the circus performed. These children were typically from troubled families, or were otherwise unlikely to be immediately missed if they disappeared. During the circus's stay in each town, members of the organization would make contact with selected children and persuade them to join the circus, ostensibly as performers or workers. Once the children were integrated into the circus organization, they were subjected to abuse and exploitation that Santos described as systematic and horrific. Some were forced to perform in illegal shows for adult audiences, while others were sold outright to criminal networks that operated throughout the Midwest. Santos estimated that over the 4 years she had been with the circus, dozens of children had been abducted and trafficked through the organization. The actual number was impossible to determine because records were deliberately kept minimal, and many of the children had been given new identities that erased their original backgrounds. Jasper McKinnon, according to Santos, had gradually become aware of the trafficking operation and had grown increasingly uncomfortable with his inadvertent role in it. As a clown, he had frequent contact with children in the audience, and he had begun to notice patterns that suggested some of the children who showed special interest in the circus were later reported missing from their communities. McKinnon had attempted to confront Vincent Romano about his suspicions, demanding that the trafficking operation be stopped and threatening to contact law enforcement if it continued. The confrontation had escalated throughout the final week in Millbrook, with Romano becoming increasingly concerned that McKinnon would expose the entire operation. The violent confrontation during the Saturday night performance had been the culmination of this conflict. McKinnon had used his time in the ring to attempt to publicly expose the trafficking operation, naming Romano and providing details about the crimes he had witnessed. According to Santos, Romano and several other members of the organization had attacked McKinnon immediately after the lights went out, beating him severely and then dragging him from the ring. McKinnon had been murdered that night, and his body had been disposed of in a location that Santos claimed not to know. The decision to abandon the circus and flee Millbrook had been made immediately after McKinnon's murder, with Romano recognizing that the clown's public accusations had made it impossible to continue operating in the area. The entire organization had packed up and departed within hours, leaving behind anything that was not essential for their continued operation. Santos's testimony provided investigators with valuable information about the structure and operation of the trafficking ring, but it also raised disturbing questions about the fate of the children who had been abducted over the years. The FBI launched an extensive effort to identify and locate these victims, though the passage of time and the deliberate destruction of records made this task extremely challenging. The investigation expanded to include a search for other members of the circus organization who might still be alive and could provide additional information about the trafficking operation. Several former performers were located and interviewed, though most claimed to have been unaware of the criminal activities and provided little useful information. The search for Vincent Romano himself proved to be particularly challenging. FBI records showed that he had used multiple aliases over the years and had connections to organized crime figures who could have helped him establish a new identity and disappear permanently. In 2016, investigators received a significant break when a man claiming to be Vincent Romano was arrested in Mexico on unrelated charges. DNA analysis confirmed that he was indeed the former circus owner, though by the time of his arrest he was 78 years old and suffering from advanced dementia that made him unable to provide coherent information about his past activities. Romano was extradited to the United States and charged with multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and human trafficking related to his activities with the Starlight Family Circus. However, his deteriorating mental condition made him incompetent to stand trial, and he died in federal custody in 2018 before any legal resolution could be reached. The investigation into the circus trafficking ring continued even after Romano's death, with investigators working to identify victims and provide closure for families who had lost children decades earlier. The FBI established a tip line and publicized information about the case in hopes of locating additional survivors who might be able to provide information about the organization's activities. Several individuals came forward claiming to be survivors of the trafficking ring, though verifying their accounts proved difficult due to the passage of time and the traumatic nature of their experiences. Some provided information that helped investigators understand the scope and methods of the operation, while others were unable to provide specific details that could be corroborated. The case of the Starlight Family Circus became a landmark investigation in the study of historical human trafficking and organized crime in the United States. The FBI used information from the investigation to develop new techniques for identifying and investigating similar operations, and the case was studied by law enforcement agencies throughout the country. For the community of Millbrook, the resolution of the 40-year-old mystery brought both closure and a renewed sense of horror about what had occurred in their town. The discovery that their beloved annual circus had been a front for such terrible crimes was difficult for many residents to accept, particularly those who had fond memories of attending performances as children. The Millbrook Commons Shopping Center was completed as planned, though a memorial plaque was installed near the site where the buried crate had been discovered. The plaque honors the memory of Jasper McKinnon and the unknown victims of the trafficking ring, serving as a reminder that evil can hide behind the most innocent facades. The clown costume found beneath the floor of the former Hartwell Field was preserved as evidence and later displayed in the FBI's Museum of Criminal Artifacts. It serves as a stark reminder of how symbols of joy and entertainment can be corrupted by those who exploit the innocence and trust of children. Detective Sarah Chen continued to work on cold cases related to the circus investigation until her retirement in 2020. She estimated that the trafficking ring had been responsible for the disappearance of at least 30 children over its 4-year operation, though the actual number was likely higher due to incomplete records and the deliberate concealment of evidence. Maria Santos, the former aerialist whose testimony had been crucial to understanding the trafficking operation, entered witness protection and spent her remaining years working with organizations that combat human trafficking. She died in 2019, taking with her detailed knowledge about the circus's operations that she had been unable or unwilling to share even with investigators. The Starlight Family Circus case became the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and academic studies that examined the intersection of organized crime and legitimate entertainment businesses. The case highlighted the vulnerability of children in small communities and the importance of recognizing patterns of criminal activity that cross jurisdictional boundaries. For law enforcement agencies, the investigation demonstrated the value of preserving cold case evidence and applying new technological capabilities to historical crimes. The 40-year gap between the circus's disappearance and the discovery of the buried evidence showed that justice, while delayed, could still be served even in seemingly hopeless cases. The macabre history of the Starlight Family Circus serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly innocent entertainment. The red and yellow striped big top that had brought joy to thousands of children over the decades had concealed a darkness that was only exposed when a clown costume was found beneath the floor of an Iowa field 40 years after the circus vanished. Today, the site of the former Hartwell Field is a busy shopping center where families go about their daily routines, largely unaware of the terrible events that once took place there. But for those who know the full story of the Starlight Family Circus, the memory serves as a reminder that the most horrific crimes can hide behind the most innocent facades, and that the search for truth and justice must never be abandoned, no matter how much time has passed. The discovery of Jasper McKinnon's clown costume beneath the floor was more than just the solution to a 40-year-old mystery. It was the key that unlocked a chamber of horrors that had been sealed by time and deliberate concealment, allowing the voices of victims to finally be heard and ensuring that their suffering would not be forgotten. In the end, the clown who had tried to expose the truth in his final performance had succeeded, though it took 4 decades for his message to be understood. The costume buried beneath the Iowa soil had preserved not just fabric and thread, but also the evidence needed to reveal one of the most disturbing criminal enterprises in American history. The Starlight Family Circus had vanished in 1974, taking its secrets with it into the night. But the earth had kept those secrets safe, waiting for the right moment to give up its evidence and allow justice to finally shine light into the darkness that had hidden beneath the big top for so many years.